The year is 1942. The world is ablaze. For the United States, a nation still reeling from the attack on Pearl Harbor, the war in the Pacific has been a relentless series of defeats. Then, on August 7, a new chapter begins, one written in blood and mud on a remote island. It is the first American offensive of World War II, a gamble against an entrenched and victorious enemy. But what if the greatest threat to this audacious plan wasn't the enemy at all, but the very commanders who ordered it? What if the men on the ground were sent into a fight their own leaders believed was doomed to fail? In the sweltering heat of the South Pacific, Major General Alexander Vandegrift, of the United States Marine Corps, stands on the cusp of history. Born on March 13, 1887, in Charlottesville, Virginia, Alexander Vandegrift's path to this moment has been long and varied. The son of an architect and contractor, he possessed a quiet determination that belied his gentle Southern demeanor. He attended the University of Virginia for 2 years before being commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps in January 1909. His early career saw him serving in the Caribbean and Central America, participating in the capture of Coyotepe in Nicaragua in 1912, the occupation of Veracruz, Mexico, in 1914, and pacification efforts in Haiti starting in 1915. These experiences, far from the grand battlefields of Europe, honed his skills in jungle warfare and small unit tactics, preparing him in an unusual way for the challenges of the Pacific theater. By March 1942, Alexander Vandegrift had risen to the rank of Major General and assumed command of the 1st Marine Division. This division, the 1st Marine Corps division to ever leave the shores of the United States, was now his to lead into the crucible of combat. His command is tasked with Operation Watchtower, an audacious plan to seize Guadalcanal, Tulagi, and Florida Island in the Solomon Islands. The Japanese have been rapidly expanding their empire, and in July 1942, they began constructing an airfield on Guadalcanal, posing a direct threat to Allied supply lines to Australia. The Allies recognized that land-based planes operating from this field would seriously menace bases in the New Hebrides and New Caledonia, as well as Port Moresby and New Guinea. The stakes are immense. This is the first major Allied land offensive against Japan in the war, a critical step to halt their advance and begin turning the tide in the Pacific. The challenges facing Major General Alexander Vandegrift and his 1st Marine Division are monumental. The planning for Operation Watchtower is rushed, executed in approximately 1 month. Logistical support is a constant, gnawing worry. The main supply base is a staggering 1,825 miles to the south in Auckland, New Zealand, with only rudimentary advanced bases closer to the target. Even Espiritu Santo, 560 miles southeast of Guadalcanal, is still in the earliest stages of being built and stocked. Supply plans call for 60 days of food and ammunition, and 90 days of construction material, but the reality of moving these provisions across thousands of miles of ocean, then unloading them onto undeveloped beaches, is a logistical nightmare. Admiral Richmond K. Turner, commanding the amphibious forces, will later lament that 80% of his time during the first 4 months of the operation is dedicated to logistics, describing it as living from one logistic crisis to another. Adding to the logistical woes is the sheer inexperience of American forces in large-scale amphibious assaults. While the Marines are the only trained amphibious assault troops available in the Pacific at this time, the logistical aspects of such an undertaking are largely untested. A dismal rehearsal at Kodo Island in late July reveals critical shortcomings, particularly the need for organized boat waves and larger ships to provide cover and fire support during landings. The terrain itself presents a formidable adversary: dense jungle, torrential rain, thick mud, and unfamiliar landscapes. The Japanese, meanwhile, are known for their fierce, often suicidal, resistance, fighting to the death. Initial intelligence on Japanese forces on Guadalcanal is spotty, with estimates suggesting around 5,000 personnel, including an infantry regiment of 2,100 men. The actual number is closer to 3,700 Japanese personnel across Guadalcanal, Tulagi, and Gavutu-Tanambogo, with only about 650 fighting troops on Guadalcanal itself. However, the Japanese possess a significant strategic advantage. They are already constructing an airfield on Guadalcanal, a vital asset that, once completed, would allow them to dominate the skies and seas around the island. This airfield, later named Henderson Field by the Marines, is the primary objective. Perhaps the most insidious obstacle, however, is the skepticism within Allied High Command itself. Many view the operation as a risky, premature venture. Some believe that the Americans are not yet ready for a major offensive against the Japanese. The entire campaign is a strategic gamble, fraught with peril and uncertainty, with Vandegrift and his Marines as the spearhead. No one believed it was possible to seize and hold such a remote and heavily defended island. They were about to be proven catastrophically wrong by the tenacity of Alexander Vandegrift and the Marines under his command. At 6:14 on the morning of August 7, 1942, the stillness of the Solomon Islands shatters as Allied naval guns unleash a thunderous bombardment. Cruisers and destroyers hurl shells at suspected enemy positions on Guadalcanal, Tulagi, and Florida Island. Simultaneously, carrier-based aircraft from the USS Enterprise, Saratoga, and Wasp launch strikes, softening targets before the landing. This coordinated assault achieves complete surprise for the Japanese. The invasion force, designated Task Force 62, divides into two groups. One group targets Tulagi and the nearby islands of Gavutu and Tanambogo, where approximately 3,000 U.S. Marines under Brigadier General William Rupertus face fierce resistance from 886 Imperial Japanese Navy personnel. The fighting for these smaller islands is brutal and protracted, with the Japanese defenders resisting almost to the last man. Tulagi is secured on August 8, and Gavutu and Tanambogo by August 9, but at a cost of 248 Marine casualties. Meanwhile, on Guadalcanal, the main force under Major General Alexander Vandegrift prepares for its landing. At 9:10, the first wave of 11,000 U.S. Marines, primarily from the 1st Marine Division, comes ashore between Coley Point and Lunga Point on Guadalcanal's northern coast. The landing is largely unopposed. The Japanese naval construction units and combat troops, commanded by Captain Kanae Monzon, are caught off guard by the naval bombardment and aerial bombing. They panic, abandoning the airfield and fleeing approximately 3 miles, 5 kilometers, west towards the Matanacao River and Point Cruz area. The 5th Marines, forming Combat Group A, swiftly establish the beachhead. Following them, the 1st Marines, Combat Group B, push inland. Their initial objective is a grassy knoll to the southwest, which is in fact Mount Austin, some 8 miles, 13 kilometers, away. The advance is slowed by the rough terrain and the Tenaru River to the west of the beachhead. By the end of the first day, Alexander Vandegrift has all 5 of his infantry battalions ashore. The 1st Marines advance about 1 mile inland before digging in for the night. The 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, reaches Alligator Creek, approximately 2 miles west of the beachhead, and establishes a defensive line. The eastern flank is covered by the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. The lack of immediate Japanese ground resistance allows the Marines to make good initial progress. Their primary goal is the Japanese-constructed airfield near Lunga Point. By 1600 on August 8, the airfield is secured. The Marines quickly rename it Henderson Field, in honor of Major Lofton Henderson, a Marine aviator killed at the Battle of Midway. This airfield will become the epicenter of the entire Guadalcanal campaign, a strategic prize both sides will fight desperately to control. However, the initial calm on Guadalcanal is deceptive. At 13:15 on August 7, the first Japanese air response arrives. The Imperial Japanese Navy dispatches 53 aircraft from Rabaul, 600 miles away, to attack the concentration of American shipping off Guadalcanal. This force includes 27 twin-engine Betty bombers and 18 fighters. A brief but intense air battle ensues. The Japanese manage only a single hit on a destroyer, the USS Mugford, in exchange for 16 aircraft lost. The only significant impact on the Marines ashore is a 3.5-hour delay in unloading vital supplies from the ships. The situation at the beachhead quickly deteriorates into chaos. Supplies pile up on the beaches, impeding the ability of the beach parties to cope. The lack of proper unloading facilities and sufficient landing craft means that cargo must be laboriously transferred to the beaches, then reloaded onto other vehicles, or even carried by hand, to reach the supply dumps inland. This inefficient process leaves the vulnerable transports exposed. Unloading is eventually suspended at 2:42 on the morning of August 8. From their headquarters in Rabaul, over 600 miles away, the Japanese 8th Fleet initially misinterprets the American landings. They believe it to be a destructive raid, not a full-scale invasion. Vice Admiral Gunnage I. Mikawa, commanding the Japanese 8th Fleet, quickly grasps the strategic significance of the American presence. He immediately orders a counterattack. His force, consisting of 5 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 1 destroyer, sets out from Rabaul to attack the Allied naval forces. The Imperial General Headquarters, however, is plagued by a lack of coordination between the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy, which operate under separate commands and often pursue conflicting strategies. This bureaucratic paralysis contributes to delays in committing significant ground forces. Japanese commanders, overconfident in their ability to easily eject the Americans, do not share the same sense of urgency as Admiral Mikawa. Their initial response is piecemeal, underestimating the scale and intent of the American offensive. They assume that a quick naval strike will scatter the transports and leave the Marines stranded. This critical misjudgment will prove catastrophic. The night of August 8 into the 9th brings the first major naval engagement of the campaign, the Battle of Savo Island. Japanese Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa's force surprises the Allied screening force, consisting of 3 U.S. heavy cruisers, USS Astoria, Quincy, and Vincennes, 1 Australian heavy cruiser, HMAS Canberra, and 2 U.S. destroyers. In a stunning victory, Mikawa's force sinks 1 Australian and 3 American cruisers, and damages another American cruiser and 2 destroyers. The Japanese suffer only moderate damage to 1 cruiser. This devastating defeat for the Allies leaves the transport fleet, still partially unloaded, dangerously exposed. Fearing further daylight air attacks, Admiral Mikawa withdraws without attacking the vulnerable transports. The immediate consequence of the Battle of Savo Island is dire for the Marines on Guadalcanal. Vice Admiral Frank J. Fletcher, commanding the U.S. carrier covering force, concerned about risking his 3 remaining fleet carriers within range of Japanese land-based aircraft and low on fuel, makes the critical decision to withdraw his carriers on the evening of August 7. This leaves the Marines ashore without air cover and with greatly reduced naval support. The remaining vessels of the American Amphibious Task Force also depart, leaving behind only about half of their cargo. Alexander Vandegrift and his 11,000 Marines are now alone on Guadalcanal, short on supplies, and without control of the sea or air around them. The Marines immediately begin to fortify their perimeter around Henderson Field, transforming the captured airfield into a crucial forward operating base. They race against time to complete the airfield, working under the constant threat of Japanese counterattacks. On August 20, the first American aircraft land on Henderson Field, 19 Grumman F-4F Wildcat fighters and 12 Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers. This small, motley collection of Marine, U.S. Army Air Forces, and U.S. Navy aviators will become known as the Cactus Air Force, CAF, named after the Allied codename for Guadalcanal. Their presence is a lifeline, providing crucial air support and reconnaissance, though they are constantly outnumbered and under attack. Japanese air attacks become almost daily after the American carriers withdraw. On August 8, Japanese torpedo planes launch another assault on the U.S. fleet, damaging the destroyer USS Jarvis and the transport USS Elliott, which is so severely hit it has to be beached to prevent sinking. The skies above Guadalcanal become a battleground, with American aircraft engaging Japanese raiders from Rabaul. The Japanese are determined to retake Henderson Field. Imperial General Headquarters orders a joint counteroffensive. The Ichiki detachment, approximately 2,000 strong, consisting of an infantry battalion, artillery, anti-tank guns, and engineers, is diverted from Guam and placed under the command of the 17th Army. Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki, commanding this detachment, is confident in his veteran troops. On the night of August 21, the Japanese launch their first major ground offensive against the Marine perimeter east of Henderson Field. This engagement, known as the Battle of the Tenaru, or Battle of Alligator Creek, sees approximately 900 veteran Japanese Army troops assault the Marine lines. The U.S. Marine defenders, prepared and dug in, annihilate the attacking force. The Japanese suffer devastating casualties, with nearly all of the 900 attackers killed, while the Marines incur only 35 killed and 75 wounded. This brutal engagement sets the tone for the fighting to come. Fierce, close-quarters combat against an enemy who refuses to surrender. What does it tell you about a man that he made that choice with everything to lose? Tell me in the comments. The logistical challenges continue to plague Alexander Vandegrift and his men. The lack of proper facilities means supplies often remain on the beaches, exposed to the elements and enemy attacks. Malaria and other tropical diseases begin to take a heavy toll on the Marines, further depleting their strength. The dense jungle, characterized by thick vegetation and unfamiliar terrain, makes movement and supply inland incredibly difficult. The Japanese, despite their initial setback, continue to reinforce Guadalcanal. They begin using high-speed destroyers, later dubbed the Tokyo Express, by the Allies, to ferry troops and supplies to the island under the cover of darkness. These missions are timed to arrive at dusk, unload, and depart before dawn, avoiding the Cactus Air Force. These destroyers, designed for combat rather than transport, can only carry limited supplies, often just food for survival. This reliance on destroyers for resupply will be a critical factor in the attrition of Japanese forces. Throughout September, the Japanese launch further attempts to retake Henderson Field. On September 12, elements of the 35th Infantry Brigade, under Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi, launch a major assault against Edson's Ridge, a strategic high ground overlooking the airfield. For 3 nights, Marine Raiders and the 1st Parachute Battalion, under Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson, repel wave after wave of fanatical Japanese attacks. The fighting is desperate and hand-to-hand, with the Marines often resorting to bayonets and rifle butts to hold their ground. The Japanese suffer over 600 killed in action, while the Marines sustain 104 killed and 205 wounded. Edson's Ridge is held, but the cost is immense. The naval battles intensify around Guadalcanal, as both sides fight for control of the seas, crucial for resupply and reinforcement. On August 24, the Battle of the Eastern Solomons erupts, a carrier engagement where U.S. and Japanese ships never sight each other, with all attacks carried out by carrier-based aircraft. The Japanese light carrier Ryujo is sunk, and their efforts to land 1,500 troops via transports are thwarted by air attacks. 2 days later, dive bombers sink another transport carrying over 1,000 troops. Despite these victories, the U.S. Navy also suffers losses. On September 15, the Japanese submarine I-19 torpedoes and sinks the aircraft carrier USS Wasp, which is covering a troop convoy. The loss of a carrier is a severe blow to the already stretched Allied naval forces. By October, the situation on Guadalcanal remains precarious. The Marines are exhausted, plagued by disease, and running low on supplies. Daily bombing raids by Japanese aircraft from Rabaul contribute to increasing cases of combat fatigue. Alexander Vandegrift's command is now effectively isolated, dependent on the tenuous supply lines and the bravery of the Cactus Air Force. Which side of this story do you think history got wrong? Tell me in the comments. On October 13, the 1st U.S. Army unit, the 164th Infantry Regiment, arrives on Guadalcanal to reinforce the Marines, taking a 6,600-yard sector at the east end of the American perimeter. This additional manpower is a welcome relief, but the Japanese are also sending significant reinforcements. In late October, the Japanese commit the majority of two divisions, the 2nd and 38th, supported by heavy 150 mm guns. The Japanese launch another major offensive in late October, aiming to finally overrun Henderson Field. This involves a coordinated land and naval assault. On the night of October 23, a heavy bombardment of the airfield begins, followed by a series of ground attacks. The fighting is brutal and continues for several days. Japanese forces manage to make some gains, but the Allied defenders, a mix of Marines and Army troops, repel the main thrusts, preventing the airfield's capture. The naval battles continue to rage. On the night of October 11, the Battle of Cape Esperance occurs, where a U.S. task force surprises and defeats a Japanese force attempting to bombard Henderson Field and resupply their ground troops. However, the Americans still do not fully control the seas around Guadalcanal. In early November, the Japanese organize a large transport convoy to deliver 7,000 infantry troops and their equipment to Guadalcanal for another attempt to retake Henderson Field. Several Japanese warship forces are assigned to bombard the airfield to neutralize the Cactus Air Force. Alerted by constant aerial and submarine reconnaissance, Admiral William F. Halsey, Jr., now commanding the South Pacific area, dispatches a strong cruiser force to intercept the Japanese. The resulting naval Battle of Guadalcanal, fought from November 12 to 15, is a series of extremely destructive nighttime surface engagements. Both sides suffer heavy losses in ships and men. On November 12, two Japanese battleships sortie down the slot, hoping to sufficiently damage Henderson Field to allow their transports to land. Halsey's forces engage them. The 5 American cruisers suffer heavy damage, with the USS Atlanta sunk and the damaged USS Juno later torpedoed and lost. The Japanese also lose a battleship and several destroyers. Despite the heavy losses, the U.S. forces succeed in turning back the Japanese battleship bombardment of Henderson Field. Allied aircraft from Henderson Field then relentlessly attack the Japanese troop transports, sinking most of them and preventing the majority of the 7,000 Japanese troops and their vital equipment from reaching Guadalcanal. This naval victory is a turning point, severely crippling the Japanese ability to reinforce their ground forces on the island. The Marines, under Alexander Vandegrift, are fighting not just the enemy, but the very jungle itself. The harsh conditions, incessant rain, and constant threat of disease are as deadly as Japanese bullets. They are isolated, often without adequate food, ammunition, or medical supplies. The sheer tenacity and courage of these men, inspired by Alexander Vandegrift's visible leadership, walking the front lines and speaking with his men, keeps them fighting. He understands the importance of morale, strategy, and resilience, and his ability to lead from the front earns him the trust and admiration of those under his command. If you had been given that order, would you have followed it? Tell me in the comments. The Japanese, facing their own dire logistical problems, are forced to increasingly rely on the Tokyo Express. The lack of mechanical power on Guadalcanal means that even the limited supplies delivered by destroyers must be unloaded, landed, and transported manually to the front lines by human power. This arduous task further exhausts their already beleaguered troops. Starvation and disease begin to ravage the Japanese forces on Guadalcanal, becoming as deadly as combat itself. By early December, the long, brutal struggle for Guadalcanal begins to favor the Allies. The Japanese naval losses in November make large-scale reinforcement impossible. The relentless pressure from the Marines and Army troops, combined with the devastating effectiveness of the Cactus Air Force, slowly but surely pushes the Japanese back. Alexander Vandegrift and his 1st Marine Division have held their ground for months, enduring unimaginable hardships. On December 9, 1942, Major General Alexander Vandegrift is relieved of command of the 1st Marine Division, handing it over to Major General Alexander M. Patch of the U.S. Army. The 1st Marine Division, after 4 months of continuous, brutal combat, is finally withdrawn from Guadalcanal. They have achieved their objective, but the campaign is far from over. Army troops continue the fight to completely clear the island. The relentless tropical sun beats down on the exhausted faces of the Marines. Day after day, the jungle presses in, a suffocating green wall that conceals unseen dangers. It is late November 1942. The constant thud of distant artillery and the crackle of small arms fire are the soundtrack to their existence. For weeks, the men of the 1st Marine Division have been embroiled in a grinding war of attrition, clawing their way through dense undergrowth, across muddy rivers, and over treacherous ridges. Their uniforms are caked with mud, their bodies gaunt from meager rations and the insidious grip of malaria. Each man carries the weight of months of combat, the memory of fallen comrades, and the ever-present threat of a tenacious enemy. Major General Alexander Vandegrift, though outwardly calm, feels the immense pressure. He knows his division is at the breaking point. Supplies are critically low. Ammunition is rationed, and medical supplies are stretched thin. The constant threat of Japanese counter-offensives, both by land and sea, hangs heavy in the humid air. Intelligence reports confirm that the Japanese are still attempting to land reinforcements, albeit in smaller numbers, using their fast destroyers under the cover of darkness. Every night brings the possibility of another desperate fight, another wave of determined attackers. The perimeter around Henderson Field, the prize they have fought so desperately to hold, is a patchwork of foxholes, barbed wire, and hastily constructed bunkers. The airfield itself, though operational, is a constant target for Japanese artillery and bombing raids. The planes of the Cactus Air Force, battered and worn, are flying continuous sorties, providing the only consistent air support. Their pilots are as exhausted as the ground troops, pushing themselves and their machines to the limit. Alexander Vandegrift walks the lines, his presence a quiet, steadying force. He speaks to his men, listens to their concerns, and shares their hardships. He understands the profound psychological toll of this endless struggle, the green hell that Guadalcanal has become. He knows that his Marines are not just fighting the Japanese, they are fighting the jungle, the disease, and the crushing isolation. He looks into their eyes, seeing the weariness, but also the unyielding resolve that has defined their fight. The decisive moment is not a single, dramatic charge, but a slow, agonizing grind. It is the cumulative effect of every patrol, every skirmish, every night spent awake, listening for the enemy. It is the unwavering determination to hold the perimeter, to keep Henderson Field operational, and to deny the Japanese any foothold. The Japanese, too, are suffering immensely. Their supply lines are shattered, their men starving and ravaged by disease. They are launching increasingly desperate, poorly coordinated attacks, driven by a fanatical refusal to concede defeat. Alexander Vandegrift makes the difficult decision to rotate units, to give his most exhausted battalions a brief respite, even as the fighting continues elsewhere. He meticulously plans the integration of the arriving army units, ensuring a seamless transition and reinforcing the weakening lines. He understands that victory on Guadalcanal will not come from a single, decisive battle, but from enduring longer, suffering more, and simply refusing to break. The climax is the silent, internal resolve that permeates every Marine, every soldier, and every airman. It is the moment when, despite overwhelming odds and unimaginable suffering, they collectively decide that they will not yield. It is the courage to stand one more night, fire one more round, dig one more foxhole. It is the unshakable belief that their sacrifice is not in vain, that they are holding a vital line against an enemy that threatens the very fabric of freedom. Alexander Vandegrift, through his quiet leadership and unwavering commitment, embodies this collective will. His Marines, though battered, refuse to be broken. They hold. And in that holding, the tide of the Pacific War slowly, inexorably, begins to turn. The Guadalcanal campaign, spanning from August 7, 1942, to February 9, 1943, marks a profound turning point in the Pacific theater of World War II. For Major General Alexander Vandegrift and his 1st Marine Division, the 4 months they spent on the island proved to be a crucible that forged their legendary status. Their tenacity, courage, and resourcefulness against a strong, determined, and experienced enemy earned Alexander Vandegrift the Medal of Honor for his actions between August 7 and December 9, 1942. He was also awarded the Navy Cross for his outstanding service during the initial attack. The campaign validated the concept of amphibious warfare and demonstrated the critical importance of combined arms operations, particularly the integration of land, sea, and air power. The seizure and defense of Henderson Field proved decisive, allowing the Cactus Air Force to interdict Japanese supply lines and provide vital air cover, preventing the Japanese from effectively reinforcing their ground forces. The human cost was immense. The Allies suffered approximately 7,100 killed, with over 7,789 wounded. The Japanese losses were far greater, with more than 25,000 men killed. Of the roughly 30,000 Japanese troops who landed on Guadalcanal, an estimated 5,000 to 6,000 were killed in combat, while a staggering 15,000 died from starvation and disease, earning the island the grim nickname, Starvation Island. Both sides lost 24 warships. Alexander Vandegrift's leadership during the campaign was instrumental. He not only commanded the first major Allied ground offensive of the war but also successfully held his position against repeated counterattacks despite diminishing supplies. His ability to lead from the front, often visiting the front lines and speaking with his men, fostered trust and admiration. After Guadalcanal, Alexander Vandegrift continued his distinguished career. In July 1943, he commanded the 1st Marine Amphibious Corps during the landing at Empress Augusta Bay, Bougainville. He returned to Washington, D.C. in late 1943 and was sworn in as the 18th Commandant of the Marine Corps on January 1, 1944. In April 1945, he became the first active-duty U.S. Marine to be promoted to 4-star general. Perhaps one of his most significant, yet often overlooked, contributions occurred after the war. In the post-war years, Alexander Vandegrift played a crucial role in preventing the Marine Corps from being merged into the U.S. Army, successfully defending its existence and historic mission as a distinct and integral part of the armed forces of the United States. He retired in 1948 after serving nearly 40 years. An unexpected fact about Alexander Vandegrift's legacy is that he wrote a prophetic article in 1909, during his early years as a second lieutenant, titled, Aviation, the Cavalry of the Future. This early insight into the importance of air power foreshadowed the critical role that air superiority, particularly from Henderson Field, would play in his defining victory decades later on Guadalcanal. If this story moved you, if you think these men deserve to be remembered, leave one word in the comments: steadfast. Subscribe for a new forgotten story every week.